Hello everyone, Thersites the Historian here, and I saw an article recently that I would like to respond to in detail. I have never recorded in this fashion before, so I can't verify that the audio quality will be as good as usual. Also, I have a neighbor blaring his stereo. However, due to time constraints, I don't really have a very good alternative to recording right now. So let's go ahead and get the point with Cilizza. So, CNN released an article called The Definitive Ranking of 2020 Democrats. I have so many issues with this article, first and foremost being the idea that you can make a definitive ranking of 2020 Democrats in the summer of 2018. We haven't seen how the midterms have gone, we haven't seen what the public mood will be going into 2020. There are a lot of factors that we can't account for, so anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen in 2020 is either really trying to engage in showmanship to sell themselves as a political expert, or if they actually do believe what they're saying, then they are profoundly full of shit. What I will try to do is break down the limited reasoning by these two idiot authors, and then add my own 2 cents. One thing I will give them credit for is introducing a candidate that I had not considered, but who may be semi-viable. So, the two gentlemen providing the so-called analysis on this definitive ranking are Cilizza, who is a hack, and Harry Enten, who, if his one article on Cynthia Nixon not being able to get over with black voters and having a progressive problem like Bernie Sanders, therefore Harry Enten is more or less trying to make himself into yet another identity politics pundit. You know it's going to be good if you have 2 hacks in one article. So, let's scroll down. We'll skip the little video. I don't give a shit about it. Alright, so, there are exactly 838 days between today and November 3rd, 2020, aka Election Day. That's 2 years, 3 months, and 15 days. So, in anyone's opinion who's not a complete buffoon, that's way too early to make a call. Except if you're these two guys. Which in our expert opinions, I assume the word expert is being used ironically, at least I hope, that's a long way from now. Too soon, some might say, I would be one of those some, to make predictions of any sort about how the 2020 race for the Democratic presidential nomination to challenge President Donald Trump might play out. Another ad for The Point, which is the show where you can do anything except reach the point. Some is not us. Yeah, as seen by the use of the word definitive. And here's a few of the reasons why. 1, if the Iowa caucus, the kickoff of the presidential voting season, is held on the same date it was in 2016, February 1st, we're only 18 months from the first vote. That's not a reason why. That would be a reason against you, because 18 months is still a long time. That's still too long to really know. You can start making reasonable predictions maybe by the late summer of 2019. We sort of knew who was running and who would make a splash by that point last cycle, or at least we had some idea. A lot of people were writing off Trump, and a lot of people also wrote off Bernie. But, for the most part, it was clear that, say, Lincoln Chafee wasn't going to make a strong run of it. One candidate, Maryland Representative John Delaney, has already officially announced his 2020 candidacy. Okay, I'm sure that he is not necessarily a top-tier candidate, so who gives a shit? Top-tier potential candidates from Joe Biden to Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders, and it's interesting they consider Bernie a top-tier candidate given what they say later, have been traveling the country, stopping in key states like Iowa and New Hampshire to support down-ballot candidates in the 2018 midterms. Yeah, they're all running, we know it, but, a lot of it will depend on how they position themselves between now and then, what faction of the party they ally themselves with, what they do policy-wise or in terms of political stances, rallies held, things like that. So just because they're doing random things for candidates, that in itself is not all that meaningful. You need to examine what they're doing specifically, and of course, Hack 1 and Hack 2 don't get around to doing that. Polling is already being done, both nationally and in early voting states like New Hampshire, to gauge the early state of the race. And they reference polls a couple times, but they do so fairly disingenuously, as we'll see. The process of running for president, given the money a candidate has to raise and the organizations that must be built in early voting states, is like an iceberg. The bit that pokes its head out of the water is only a very small part of a much larger mass below the surface. Okay. And yeah, you don't really see icebergs generally until you're pretty close, from what I understand, based on watching the Titanic movie. Anyway, that's a terrible analogy. I think it's pretty clear with public disclosure how these organizations are run. Politics is not a terribly secretive process. I really don't know what they thought they were doing with that analogy. And also, the ability to raise money, while it is a factor, doesn't necessarily win races, as we just saw with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or even the strong showing that Bernie did in 2016, or Trump's campaign where he got massively outspent by Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush, by the way, dropped $80 million and received maybe 80 votes. Alright, so we're in the process, or we're in the below-the-surface part of the presidential primary fight right now, and will be for at least the next 5 months, while the Democratic Party focuses on trying to win back control of the House and Senate. But just because you don't see or hear everything that's going on doesn't mean it's not happening. The below-the-surface part is basically getting allies for your run. Why don't they just say that rather than being condescending and making it out like it's something that's super complicated? That's putting together a staff, finding people to back you and endorse you, coming up with a slogan, a strategy, getting your name out there. It's not really some secretive, technocratic process that the average person can't understand, especially when all the media does cover in any reasonable level of detail our electoral politics. I think the average news viewer is intelligent enough to get this, and I include all news viewers in that, not just, the best of the best. Which brings us to our rankings of the 10 men and women most likely as of today to wind up as the Democratic nominee in 2020. In ranking these candidates, we consider current polling, historic trends, and lessons that the 2018 Democratic primaries have taught us. Usually, these guys, these establishment hack types, are really loath to take away any lessons that might be unfavorable. So I find it surprising that they're, willing to consider the possibility this early on. Also, the Democratic primary process is not completely over, from what I understand. There's still a progressive gentleman running in Kansas, and he's being campaigned for by Bernie and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So saying that it's already over and that we can already draw lessons from it is a bit premature. But of course, these guys, these are the premature ejaculators of political writing, so they give no fucks. So, we have tended to default to early polling leaders, and women, and liberals. Okay, we'll see. I think that some of their advertising here is a bit faulty, as we'll see. Obviously, this list, just like what Democratic voters are looking for in their candidate, can and will change between now and when the first ballots are cast. And we will be there the whole way, releasing updated rankings once a month between now and then. Don't see your favorite candidate? Just wait! Or email us and make an argument for what we missed and why. It's Cilizza at CNN.com and Harry Enten at CNN.com. Enjoy. Okay, well, I would email them, but I try not to waste too much time engaging in conversations that are pointless. So, their definitive power rankings. 1, Joe Biden. We'll get into the reasons individually. I've talked about a lot of these people in other videos. 2, Elizabeth Warren. 3, Kamala Harris. 4, Kirsten Gillibrand. 5, Bernie Sanders. 6, Eric Holder. 7, Steve Bullock. 8, Cory Booker. 9, Mitch Landrieu. 10, Sherrod Brown. The only person I will give them credit for adding to this list that I would have never thought of is Steve Bullock. But other than that, this is not a very good list. So let's go into their details here. So, Sherrod Brown. How do you beat a populist like Trump who triumphed in the Midwest? You could nominate a Midwestern populist like the senior senator from Ohio. Brown's liberal record, matched with a gravelly voice that seems almost out of central casting, could be the ticket for Democrats. I've never heard a gravelly voice be described as a massive asset for a presidential candidate. I don't know where that comes from, if that's from some porn fantasies that these two guys have shared together, or how that has worked. Brown, though, has said he has no interest in running, and he's up for re-election to the Senate this fall. At the same time, it's somewhat hard to imagine Democrats nominating a white senator, especially one with some question marks in his personal history. Okay, It's pretty clear that Sherrod Brown will make a run for it. He's just making sure that he gets reelected in Ohio, which is increasingly red. He's pretty popular here, though, so he most likely will be reelected. At that point, he will then be able to advertise himself as the one Democrat who has a proven ability to win on unfavorable terrain and be popular. Sherrod Brown will be way stronger than 10th place. He is one of the few people who can match Trump, actually exceed Trump when it comes to strength on being anti-free trade. Sherrod Brown actually wrote the book on being against free trade. Him being white and male might be a bit of a hindrance in a Democratic Party driven by identity politics. However, I'm not sure that that obsession necessarily extends to the voters as much as it does to the establishment people who really want to put diversity at the forefront at the expense of any kind of substance. But Sherrod Brown is strong on economics, and that means that he has a puncher's chance in any race. Mitch Landrieu, number 9, and this guy should not be on the list. I made a whole video about him. He does not deserve to be in this conversation as a top 10 candidate. If Democrats want an outsider with experience, he's not an outsider. Then there are few people better than this 2-term mayor of New Orleans who has never held federal office. His sister was a senator. His dad was also a politician and a former mayor. That is not an outsider. By any stretch of the imagination. How do you get that as an outsider, really? That's ridiculous. As mayor, he removed Confederate monuments, which was not very popular, by the way. Tourism in New Orleans has declined because a lot of white people in the South were fairly offended by this. So let's call it not the greatest achievement in terms of promoting tourism in a city that relies on tourism. Being mayor of a majority black city in a party that has a substantial black voting bloc and is becoming more urban could also pay off big. Okay, so the thing is, a lot of these identity politics people, and I imagine this particular sentence was penned by Harry Enten, since this seems to be his obsession. The thing is, black people are hyper-concentrated in cities, and there are very few states where the black vote is decisive. The Democrats like to say that, black women are the backbone of their party. I'm not so convinced of that. I mean, there are races like the Doug Jones race in Alabama where black women were decisive, but the thing is, it just really is stretching it to say that a minority population which is concentrated mostly in deep South states that Democrats can't win are the decisive factor in a federal election. Not buying it. They can swing states like Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, but outside of that, maybe Michigan, I don't know. But, saying that like that's the key demographic to winning back the White House, stretching it. Let's see, what else is left? Yet, even with Trump in the White House, it's tough to imagine that a little-known mayor could win a major party nomination, especially one with some potholes in his record. I can't imagine a path for Mitch. He would run as a conservative Democrat who only has strength on the issue of race. I'm not sure that the black community nationally are big Mitch Landrieu fans. And even if they did endorse him wholeheartedly, that doesn't really amount to much. How many black people live in Ohio or New Hampshire? Like maybe 10 total? Exactly. And if you don't win those 2 primaries, if you get blown out completely, you have to then win in South Carolina and then turn it around for Super Tuesday. I don't see a good path for Mitch. It's not happening. 8, Cory Booker. In what is shaping up to be a big field, Booker will have little difficulty generating press. Disagree. Booker is boring. He will have a lot of difficulty generating press unless it's negative press about times where he's sold to Democrats down the river or claimed to be a progressive and then done super corporate things. He's been doing that since a documentary was made about his first run for mayor of Newark. It's a great documentary. And once again, we see Harry Enten's obsession with the black demographic within the Democratic Party. Just because Booker is black does not make him Obama. Democrats have also a history of nominating first full-term black senators. One time. That was a one-time thing. That's not a history or a pattern. That's a one-time thing. Let's see. Who have given a big Democratic National Convention speech. Want to know why Booker isn't higher? Google Cory Booker and neoliberal. Booker may have a major issue with the left-wing intelligentsia due to his ties to Wall Street. Yeah, no shit. I would leave the party and join the Green Party if they nominated Cory Booker. He is worse than Hillary Clinton. He's a total corporate tool and hack. There's no point in being a Democrat if your party is headed by Cory Booker, who's basically a Republican who cries and talks about social issues. There is nothing economically liberal about Cory Booker. And if you don't have liberal economics, you're completely useless as a Democrat, especially if you're running for a federal office. If you're running for some rinky-dink local office like Mitch Landrieu, good for you, buddy. If you're running for national office, you damn well better bring some economic power. Number 7, Steve Bullock. Bullock, if you don't know, and I didn't, is the 2-term governor of Montana. That's a big part of Bullock's challenge. If he runs, he will take on a whole bunch of candidates who are already known nationally. He is, well, not. But the party's growth in the West and the success of governors as presidential candidates means that a governor from this part of the country seems likely to emerge. Governors do tend to do well, but mostly on the Republican side. Democrats tend to elect senators more often than not. So, I mean, obviously Bill Clinton was a governor, and there have been previous governors like Dukakis who have been nominated, but for the most part, Democrats tend to prefer people in Congress. Let's see. The party's growth in the West and the success of governors, we already read that. Bullock looks best positioned to be that guy right now. He's been traveling to early voting states to lay the groundwork and refine a message about why and how Democrats need to expand their tent. So as someone from the middle of the country, he very well could try that angle, and I don't think he's technically a new Democrat, so it would be a little harder to hit him with the label of neoliberal than most. I could see him being a dark horse. I think he's legit. That being said, the massive name advantage that some of his main competitors will have, and their really refined, clear messages, not to mention the fact that people like Bernie Sanders have already, taken up this message of reaching the middle of the country and talking to working people all over the country. That means that it will be harder for someone to wrest that crown from him. But it's possible. So Steve Bullock, I wouldn't write him off, but I think he is about in the right place on this list, and that's pretty much the only one I agree with on this entire list. So, 1 out of 10 ain't bad, boys. All right, number 6, Eric Holder. I laughed the first time I read this when I saw Eric Holder's name, especially being so closely positioned to Bernie Sanders. Okay, let's read it. The name of the former Attorney General was on almost no one's list at the start of 2018. Certainly not mine. But he's made clear in both his travel and his rhetoric of late that he is seriously open to running for president. In June, Holder acknowledged that running for president in 2020 is something that I'm considering. And he's got a shtick against Trump. 2 guys from Queens, Holder said. That would be interesting. New Yorkers know how to talk to other New Yorkers. Holder would likely be seen as former President Barack Obama's favorite in the race given the duo's long friendship. Presumably this is a good thing in the context of a Democratic primary. Okay, I also detect a very, very strong New York bias in this article. It comes up again where people talk about how America really wants a New York versus New York race. No, they don't. That's one of the things that Steve Bullock has going for him, is that he's not from either the East or West Coast. A lot of people in the middle of the country feel disenfranchised by the complete cultural domination and political domination of the coast. No one wants to see 2 guys from the same neighborhood go head-to-head. Now, granted, Bernie would also be from the same area as Trump, but they are diametrically opposed ideologically, and it would be more interesting in that sense than someone like Eric Holder, who is not an interesting person. Also, I prefer to think of Eric Holder as placeholder. He was not a very good attorney general. He went after some white supremacists, and that's good. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, if you have domestic terrorists who are neo-Nazis or whatever they were, great. Go after them. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do, after all. You're attorney general. But pretending that he's a national hero for doing something that literally any Democratic or even most Republican attorney generals would do is downright ridiculous. And I would also remind you that under Eric Holder's so-called leadership, we sent 0 bankers to jail. So he's a placeholder, not a real attorney general, and he's not a real candidate either. Maybe he'll run, and he won't get anywhere. And once again, I have to point out that these 2 authors are really obsessed with black candidates, And they think that because Obama won that, I guess there's like a certain magic to being black. But there's not. There just isn't. As I've pointed out already. There's only one legitimate black candidate in 2020, and we'll talk about her as we go along. Number 5, Bernie Sanders. I'll just read through this bullshit and then I'll tear it apart. Sanders is one of the most beloved politicians within the Democratic Party, even though he's technically not a Democrat, with strong, favorable ratings. He's a proven vote-getter in presidential primaries, earning 43% of the 2016 Democratic primary vote. And in a party that is shifting left, Sanders was left before it was cool. So why is Sanders not higher? He's a white male, and Democrats may be looking to turn the page from 2016. Do Democrats really want another primary in which they have to argue about whether one of the major candidates is actually a Democrat or an independent? Okay. So they push this whole idea of him not technically being a Democrat twice. They ignore that when people think about Democrats, the first person they think of is Bernie Sanders. When they think about people who have stood up to Trump, tried to come up with a proactive message rather than we just resist Trump, they think of Bernie Sanders because he is by far the most outspoken and highly publicized of the Democrats right now. He's got the best name recognition. I imagine it would be very difficult to find someone who didn't know who Bernie Sanders was. Now, there are plenty of people who oppose him, but I think he's got way more, he's got the best favorable ratings of any person in America right now. His main opposition is within the party apparatus itself. Even a lot of people who voted for Hillary would be fine with Bernie as their nominee. I think for a lot of the hardcore supporters like myself and a lot of others on the Clinton side, I was on the Bernie side, obviously. It seemed like the party was a lot more divided than it was because we had very strong feelings on it. However, I think for the majority of people who voted in the 2016 primary, they would have been okay with either candidate. And that seems hard to believe given the chasm of difference between the two of them, but seems like that's where the party stood. The thing that would fuck Bernie is the party figuring out a way to screw him again, either by consolidating all its support behind a single candidate, trying to dig up dirt on Bernie, moving dates around in a way that would strategically favor one of his opponents, the kinds of things they did for Hillary, although this time it will be harder to stop Bernie. The main obstacle for Bernie becoming president is his increasing age and, if he has some sort of health crisis. He is going to be a very strong candidate. He will dominate the discourse of the race. Even if he doesn't win, he will be the person to beat. And my gut feeling is that he actually won't win. I'd like for him to win. I don't see it happening, though. But I see him making a very, very strong run for it. And anyone who wants to win the race will have to defeat Bernie Sanders. 4. Kirsten Gillibrand. There may be no more predictive qualities in Democratic primaries in 2018 than being anti-Trump and being a woman. Well, based on your previous picks, I'd have to say that being black is more important than being a woman to the two of you, but okay. Gillibrand has both of those qualities. Is being a woman a quality or just a state of being? I don't think it's a quality. I think having charisma is a quality, or having something that is based on experience or performance is a quality. Being a woman or a man is not a quality. Gillibrand has both of those qualities. She's voted less with Trump than any other senator, and that actually is a legitimate point. I'll give them credit for that. Being from New York will also give a megaphone, see Trump, Donald. Actually, it will look way more like a repeat of 2016. We already had a former New York female senator from New York run against Trump. So a lot of people would be struck by the repetition there. And when we have two major candidates and then whatever Eric Holder is from New York running against Trump potentially, it can be a little crowded. And like I said, I don't think that being from New York is nearly as much of an asset as some people seem to think. Why isn't she higher? Besides the fact that there are other women running, she may have an authenticity problem when that quality seems to be at a premium. Although she is a liberal now when it is politically expedient, she was a moderate member of the House. I think those are both legitimate points, actually. So I would actually rank Gillibrand a bit higher than this, maybe third, but I think that they pretty much nailed what her main liabilities are. One thing I would add that's one of her strengths is that she has very good political instinct in terms of knowing what is up with the party. So she senses that the party is moving left, so she's moved left accordingly over the course of her career. And she's usually been at the forefront of Democratic senators who have opposed different things that Trump's done. And a lot of times it seems like the strategy of people like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker is to wait and see what Kirsten does and then do the same thing. Number 3, Kamala Harris. If Democrats are looking to draw a very sharp contrast with Trump, Harris makes the most sense. Only if you care a lot about identity politics. There are other people who could draw a much stronger ideological contrast with Trump. The first term California senator was the first black and first Indian woman elected to the Senate from the Golden State. She comes from a law and order background. She was Attorney General of California before running for the Senate. As AG, she didn't prosecute any bankers or white-collar criminals. So, again, sort of the same problem I have with placeholder, but maybe not quite as bad. Let's see. And she's from a massive Democratic donor state. Again, neoliberal bias showing there, Chris. Meaning the money would be there for her if she did decide to run. Yeah, she's a corporatist. I mean, she's going to get some money. Just like Kirsten, who's in New York near Wall Street. And as to that, Harris's mind seems pretty much made up. She's writing a memoir set to publish in 2019, which is a sort of necessity move for someone running for president. I mean, it's a correlation, not a cause, though. A lot of people write memoirs before they run. It's not required. I'm pretty sure that Lincoln Chafee didn't write a memoir because he didn't want to be humiliated when everybody refused to publish it. Okay, number 2, Elizabeth Warren. Unlike 2016, when the Massachusetts senator was doing nothing to indicate she might run, Warren is making a series of moves that suggest that she is a likely entrant in 2020. Warren has already reached out to a series to politicians in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, according to the New York Times. So she's doing that subsurface iceberg building that they alluded to as like some abstract process that requires a great deal of analogy for the commons to understand. Why don't they just say that? Again, dumb. If Democrats are looking for some sort of compromise candidate between the establishment and the party base, Warren could fit the bill somewhat nicely. Somewhat. That's actually not a bad qualifier. Republicans repeatedly insist she is their ideal general election candidate against Trump, believing that Warren is simply too liberal to possibly win nationally. Okay, I think that while she does have friends in both camps of the party, she's not fully trusted on the progressive wing anymore. And on the establishment wing, she's also not fully trusted. So for her to win, it would require other candidates to implode, which is likely. I mean, every cycle we see a bunch of candidates implode or not take off or whatever the case might be. I would never write her off. I think that she's sort of in Sherrod Brown territory of having a puncher's chance. Let's see. Oh yeah, the other thing I forgot to point out with Sherrod was they said that he had some personal issues. He's running against a guy who ran a fake university, bankrupted a casino, said that he grabbed women by the pussy, and now has some corruption issues as president. So personal issues won't really matter on the Democratic side, I don't think, unless the public is hypercritical of Democrats while giving Trump a free pass for no reason. All that being said, I think the Republicans would be foolish to think that Warren would be a super weak candidate or the weakest of the candidates. And I think, if anything, I actually agree with their analysis that women will be strong, both in the primary and the general. The thing is, if they think that Elizabeth Warren is going to be the weakest candidate, I don't know what they're thinking. I do know what they're thinking. They're engaging in reverse psychology. The Republicans don't want to run against Warren, so they're saying that they do. And that way they're hoping that Democratic voters will be hoodwinked and say that Warren is unelectable, therefore we have to elect Joe Biden, number 1. All right, so Cotton Eye Joe Biden. The former vice president may not seem like the perfect fit for the moment in the Democratic Party. He's older, 75, which would make him the oldest candidate ever, other than Bernie Sanders, if he runs this time as well. Actually, Biden in 2020 will be older than Bernie was in 2016. White, male, and has been in electoral politics for more than 4 decades. So, classic establishment candidate. And he goes against everything that you guys said was going to matter. So let's see how you explain this away. And yet, Biden has something that no other candidate in the field has. First, he's on top of early polls gauging the 2020 field. If you exclude Bernie Sanders, yes, because he has the highest name recognition and the lowest negatives. But Biden has run several times before. He was one of the frontrunners in 1988, and then he had a brain aneurysm or brain tumor or something that removed him from the race. In 2008, he was like 4th or 5th or something like that. So he's kind of got a proven record of not catching on with voters. First, he's on top of the early polls gauge. Oh, let's see. He's leading in the national polls, except if you include Bernie. Or sometimes Bernie's a close second, so it's not like he's blowing it out. Early primary state polls and in a matchup against Trump. But that's no guarantee Biden wins the nomination. But if history holds, it's an indication he'll be right there until the end. He's not going the distance. I'm going to call that now. And I know I mocked Chris Cilizza and Harry Enten for pretending that they would know what's going to happen this far ahead of time. But there's no viable base for Joe Biden. The party likes him, but they also like Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and they would be much more eager to back those people because they're either women or minorities or both. And right now the Democratic Party is clinging on to identity politics. If they back Joe Biden as their primary candidate, then it's really hard to point at Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish, by the way. People always forget that to say he's an old white guy, but he is Jewish, so technically you could make an identity politics argument in favor of Bernie Sanders. He would be the first Jewish president. Anyway, yeah, running Joe Biden and then saying that they care about diversity and all that would seem a little weird, especially if they're pushing him to the forefront at the expense of candidates who are not old white guys. So I don't think it would make sense to really run Joe Biden. I'm sure they'll run him anyway. I mean, Democrats aren't exactly known for their political acumen. But yeah, he's not going to win. And I don't want to make a list necessarily, but I think one person who really needs to be on any kind of list is Tulsi Gabbard. You could even possibly throw in Nina Turner as a bit of a dark horse. Basically, and one other factor that these guys have not considered so far, and it's surprising by its omission, charisma. Charisma matters, and it matters a lot. In politics, charisma is an X factor which pays dividends. Anyway, that's enough of this BS. Hopefully the audio quality is good enough for you to hear it without hearing the stereo of one of my neighbors. At any rate, I'm Thersites the Historian, and this has been a look into one of the most poorly written political predictions ever.